Sector E rules, best dungeon in any game I've ever played and the best dungeon in any SMT game ever. A lot of weirdos like to inflate this dungeon's complexity by showing the map and saying, isn't this complicated? Like this dipshit. Mainly stems from the dungeon design. Oh my god, though, it's actually so much fun and really well crafted. So, in an attempt to shift public conscience in my favor for a section of a game made in 2009 for the Nintendo Memes, I will tell you why it's actually good, all while belittling my audience in an attempt to make them think I'm right by strawmanning their arguments to internalize the way they think is just inferior to my superior taste in games. Not really though, because that's not, nice. But I really do want to convince you why this dungeon is better than what most people say it is, in a respectful way. Oh, and just to cover all my bases, there are slight spoilers for Strange Journey. Nothing major, mostly context, and, some gameplay. Also, spoilers for other SMT games, because after all, this is a top 5 SMT Dungeons video, of course. I had this planned as a top 5, and got mad at imbeciles while writing the Sector E section that this just turned into Sector E and the other SMT dungeons. So yeah, I'll get into some other dungeons I like in the series, just not as in-depth as the Strange Journey Sector E dungeons, so sorry. It's time. Which is the best dungeon in any SMT game? We're finally at number 1, it's Sector E for Eridanus. You already know this. It's dumb. I already said most of the stuff establishing this, so here's the context for its place in the game. The sector occurs around halfway through the game, and at this point the game has more than established what to expect, like combat and dungeons most importantly, specifically progressing through them, exploring them, and their mechanics such as damage tiles, one-way doors, pitfalls, scanning for hidden doors and items, and plane shifting, which I swear is a lot less complicated than it sounds. Trust me, I swear to God, I'm telling the truth. So why not put all those to the test at this point? Which Strange Journey agrees to, creating one of, if not the best dungeons in the entire series. Sector Eridanus is great as it gauges how well you've picked up on dungeon exploration, mechanics, navigation, and if you're able to apply them in a more challenging setting. Oh, and if you disagree with me, you're just bad. You're just bad. So no, Sector Eridanus isn't confusing. The dungeon is expansive and challenging, yes, yet digestible to navigate thanks to how it paces itself. See, the dungeon is chunked into pieces. You're given an area of the dungeon to explore in depth one at a time until it eventually becomes the big map you eventually get. Each area is given their time to shine. Before you get to the next one, you'll already be well familiar with the dungeon once it starts looking like this, which is how most people see it while scrolling through Twitter. This could be overwhelming. Mainly because, every tile is listed. But with how the dungeon is designed, it's better to think of the dungeon like this, and how I've personally viewed the map in my most recent playthrough. So as this implies, this lets the dungeon remain coherent by allowing each part to focus on one or two specific mechanics at a time, which leads each part of the dungeon to feel further distinct from one another, or in other words, you identify the area based on the mechanics mainly used there. Examples, the first floor northeast area has floor status tiles, tight corridors with one-way doors, that stuff. And the one right above it has the phase shifting section and the hidden doors. The first floor's west side has the teleporter maze, which I'll get into later, and the one above that has the pitfalls. Like, ask anyone who's played it. They're likely to say they're all separate from one another. None of the areas really intersect with each other to create any confusion whatsoever. And if that wasn't enough to make each area feel distinct, you are locked from progressing into further sections unless you do the objectives you do have. As such, you won't accidentally waltz into a new area that isn't all too necessary to progress at the moment, and further confuse yourself with where to go. It's very objective based. You start by exploring to gain footing, run into Zelennon who needs a rare forma to work this teleporter, the obvious progression gate, and you just have to go and find it without any direct coordinates. Since the game is rather open-ended at this moment, you're required to be rather intricate with your exploration, but it's also not cryptic because you've already explored a good chunk of the limited area you do have at this point, and second, you're already familiar with how the game likes to gate progression behind mechanics like phase shifting and the hidden doors, so you already have an idea of where to possibly get it, and just have to find out where to get it. But if you don't, the game gives you a hint on how to get it if you're having a lot of trouble, don't worry. Like I said earlier, the game has already used these mechanics a bunch up until this point, so now they're allowed to get weird and implicit with their dungeon design as long as they use pre-established mechanics, which makes it challenging but memorable, as the key to progress really requires you to get your hands dirty with exploration and actually know the area. Some might say this is too confusing, but the game has been doing this stuff for the last 4 dungeons and is just a natural progression of the mechanics. And honestly, I could only see someone getting stuck if they aren't being thorough about dungeon crawling in their dungeon crawler, which the game has made very clear that you need to do. Oh yeah, and if you ever feel like everything's getting a bit too big, confusing, tiring at some point, very late into the dungeon, you are able to open up shortcuts that make retracing your steps less complicated. But this is after, you already explored most of it. Lastly, with the dungeon being so thorough about testing your pre-established navigation skills, what's a better way to finish off than with an expansive teleporter maze where you go on a scavenger hunt for items?
Everything. Literally everything.
Eridanus being all about efficiently and intricately exploring a dungeon, introducing a new concept with its own section is a great way of testing how adept you are at plotting a course. This occurs towards the end of Eridanus, where you're given a job by an unimportant individual to get 3 items to progress. And to get these items requires you to explore this teleporter maze with the items being spread throughout. Oh, and it's pretty friggin' beefy. Yeah, it could be confusing to a certain point. I'll get to that later though. At this point in the dungeon though, you've already made it through most of the concepts seen in previous dungeons. Again. So it's cool to make something new and give it its own section. It keeps the dungeon feeling fresh and you on your toes. The teleporter maze is sizable and your map can only help you so much here, because the map only marks the tile that is a teleporter once you step on it, but it doesn't tell you where it leads. It could either be a new area or so getting familiar with this new area is a must if you want to progress. Just like looking for Zeledon's Forma, the game wants you to be intricate with your exploration, however with a new mechanic. So it's up to you to learn how the mechanic works, which is pretty simple, it's a goddamn teleporter. The structure of the area, determine where to go, how to get there, and as efficiently as possible, which there are many ways. All this really ends up getting your brain thinking instead of just having a set destination and figuring out how to get there. Similar to earlier with, Zelenon's Forma key thing. The challenge is not only to figure out where the Forma is, but how to do it as efficiently as you can without having your brain become a pretzel, which will happen at some point, trust me. And in spite of being introduced towards the end of the dungeon, the teleporters and maze never feel underdeveloped due to how large/in-depth this section of the dungeon is. It's not like a 5-minute thing. This section could be considered like a third or a fourth of the total dungeon, with you having to route multiple paths for the different formas. And by sticking the teleporters here, it manages to avoid an issue of becoming tiring compared to if it were prevalent throughout the entirety of the dungeon. Like, here's one long maze of teleporter, here's another. The game decides to wait until it thinks it's ready to go all out with the teleporters, and I can respect that. However, a bit of a counterpoint though. For new mechanics, such a large and expansive section might come off as overwhelming. My first time through, I didn't really like it, if I'm being honest. Like, I was honestly expecting to shit on this for this video, but I ended up really enjoying it, having to come up with my own way without making my own brain go kaboosh. Maybe the mechanic should have been introduced a little earlier before going all out like this, or cut down on the amount of items to 1 or 2 so it's not as overwhelming. However, it's a pretty simple concept to understand, and it is shown earlier in the dungeon, albeit very briefly, I guess. But to some, including myself, that might just not be enough. Thankfully though, like the other mechanics, teleporters aren't just dropped after the dungeon, albeit they're much more laid back though. If it means anything, the teleporter maze in Eridanus was the only one that stuck with me. So hey, I guess Strange Journey agrees. If you want to teach someone to swim, you tie a 10-ton weight to their foot and drop them in the deep end and say, good luck. It's kind of annoying the first time through, but I've honestly come to appreciate the maze. Like many things in SMT, it gets way better on a second go around. Actually though, when people say Eridanus is too big or confusing, this is honestly the one section I could sort of understand where people come from. And even then, it's just this one section. All I've got left to say is get a goddamn pen and paper, God! Starting the list at number 5 is the Persona 5 dungeon. So spoilers for Persona 5. Skip to this time if you want to avoid it. It's the ship. It's a pretty awesome thing from a story context. It happens very late into the game when you've had quite a lot of dungeoning experiences, and oh, it is so hype. Like, yeah, stuff's about to go down, which it very much does. It's good. Very few games make me feel like that, but Persona 5 knows how to do that like 1, 2, 3 other times. But I think my favorite instance of that happening in the game is here. Unlike Sector E though, this dungeon has a handful of mini-bosses that are actually pretty good. And if you know me, I love my boss fights, and this dungeon has a lot of them. Setting is also sick, such a unique setting for a heist compared to everything that came before. Or maybe it's not like that for you, but to me it is. Also, cruise ships are just rad in general. See, you like the Titanic because it's a very complex cinematic masterpiece. I like it because it has a huge boat in it. Last, everyone gets their time to shine, methinks, from a narrative perspective. Except for this scene, it's kind of bad. I don't like it. It makes me very angry. Oh, and the boss rocks, both in the original and Royal. In Royal, it does one of those, skip to here if you want to avoid Royal spoilers, I guess. It's like a single boss fight, but I get it. In Royal, it does one of those one-on-one battle type things, which I adore in games, adding to the feeling of hype. Shoutouts to Kamoshida's Palace too, a great starting dungeon and really gets you motivated to kick some ass and constantly shaking up with locations and gameplay. Pretty cool. Number 4. Digital Digital Devil Saga Destiny Land Castle. Like DDS spoilers. Skip here to avoid spoilers. Destiny Land Castle. Really ill-fitting in the game tone-wise, but that's kind of why I like it. But it also does fit at the same time because it's creepy. But also like, ooh, why is this here in this place? Doesn't really fit. Something foreshadowing true nature of the game, something, I don't know. I didn't care for the DDS story that much, but I also haven't finished 2. But I'll still admit that is pretty cool, even if I didn't personally like it. The thing I really do like about this dungeon, though, are the mechanics in it. I really like the whole light redirection puzzle and the conveyor belt thing. I think they're pretty good at challenging your spatial awareness, if that's the word I'm trying to think. You know what I mean? Like, it has to, like, make you think, where does what go and what leads where, and I like that. I really wish these dungeons gimmicks were in more games, but what can you do? I like the painting gimmick. Usually I hate pitfalls, but I think DDS sidesteps this issue with the painting subtly hinting at what you're gonna do. If you fall down, it's your fault. Stupid. Also, just realizing it, DDS really likes its pitfall-related dungeons. Got the one dungeon, that other dungeon, and then you got the final dungeon, which... no... A non-pitfall related dungeon is the boat. I kind of like how it's structured. She's not like other dungeons, she's a boat. Instead of getting to the top of Dungeon Doodoo Head and Crap Citadel City, you have to reach multiple points within, which I think is pretty interesting. Definitely stuck with me more than the other dungeon, that's for true. Number 3, one of the Nocturne dungeons? Light Nocturne spoilers, skip here to avoid them. I don't know. There's always something annoying about each dungeon in the game, even though that could be said for any SMT dungeon, but I feel like in Nocturne it's the most egregious, you know? Like, there's that one prison dungeon, that really pissed me off, even if it was a pretty interesting gimmick, but I just ended up getting pissed near the end, moving on. As for my favorites, Tower of Kagetsuchi, the best sliding block dungeon in the game. Better than whatever the nah, I'm gonna save that for another day. The final climb could be kind of irritating with the trapdoors, like, WTF, getting a little goofy, but I would still say it's good. It's like, definitely might go on a little long to some, but it also has a really good boss rush, which is good at breaking things up, and they're all really original bosses too, which is nice, even if they aren't really, you know, like, a part of the dungeon's design, if that makes sense. Not like, you know, because they're in the dungeon, but they're not like a part of a puzzle, I guess, that kind of way of putting it. There's the hospital dungeon at the start of the game, going to the complete opposite end of the pool. We're in 1 foot tall water now, baby, and the water is, it's warm. But it's creepy, and I like that. Not the pool piss water, the dungeon's aesthetics, just to make that clear. But it's also a simple and a great starting dungeon. And since there's a little gremlin in the back of my brain shouting at me, yes, the Labyrinth of Amala is interesting. Not sure if I like it, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't cool. I still enjoy it, but you know how earlier I mentioned that I feel like a lot of the Nocturne dungeons have at least one annoying thing about them? Well, for the Labyrinth of Amala, multiply that by 3, maybe? I don't know. I mean, of course, I like my intricate dungeons, as you guys know, but sometimes it can just feel really annoying. Like, the key to progression is, like, all the way at the other side of the dungeon kind of thing. But I would really have to go in depth and replay the game a few more times to truly cement my feelings on it. Also, not a fan of recruiting demons being disallowed in the dungeon. Like, if I'm gonna be here for an hour or so, I want to make some friends, but the game is like, how about I freaking kill you instead? How about that? And that's why I'm putting the Labyrinth of Amada in B tier. Number 2, Persona 2. Which game, which protagonist, which dungeon? Honestly, most of them. They're not the best dungeons, as they're just regular locations you have to traverse in unique ways, such as the school, music venue in Innocent Sin, the ship, film studio in Eternal Punishment, the sanitarium, and the Aerospace Museum. While they're not the most puzzling or challenging dungeon, unless you're doing the EX dungeon, which is actually insane, it's cool to see how real places would be turned into video game dungeons. At best, it gives me the feeling of getting lost in the supermarket and trying to find my parents, but I end up discovering about the place behind the milk. And if you're wondering where I'm going with this is meant to be a compliment. It's good that I got lost. And at other times, I'm figuring out who designed these dungeons so I could just send them a mean tweet on my recently purchased Hot Wheels PC. Do you like it? I got it for a good deal, 5 bones. While it might sound like a mixed bag, they're mostly cool. And now, before we get to number 2, let's get into the honorable mentions. Tartarus, and if you thought I already hadn't been jokerized enough, then you need to catch up, bro. Oh, and also, yeah, I'm a little silly. I don't know why, but I just like it. It's just relaxing to just go through it and fight some enemies. Same with Persona 4, but less so, although the final dungeons are cool. Like, they're not really good dungeons, but they're relaxing. Oh, there's that one tower in Raito 2. Not much about it, but I like it. But it stuck with me, like one of those weird things you find on your sock, like the really prickly things, and they really hurt when you touch them. You know those. SMT V's 4th area? Does this count? And some of the other games on the SNES. So I mean, I want to like those games and their dungeons more. They are cool, but the large, like really large random encounters make me sad. But the dungeons themselves are still cool, so I'll give them a mention here. Number 1. Late TMS spoilers. Skip here to avoid them. Oh wait, the video's over. Just go. Don't skip anywhere, just go. The final dungeon in Tokyo Mirage Sessions. I should mention this list is in no particular order kind of thing, but you probably guessed that by now. No spoilers, but this dungeon is cool, short, and to the point. All the SMT staples are here, but without the tiers. A cool boss rush for a power trip, a tower, yeah. Sliding block puzzle, a teleporter maze, and a find the path thing? Oh yeah, and if you're really wondering why I'm not potentially throwing a hissy fit over this stinky idle game, stick around, haha. But also, there are no random encounters in TMS. It's like, it's up to you who you want to fight, only, if you get caught or something, so you could just focus on the dungeon exploration for the most part, which is cool. Honestly though, TMS dungeons are kinda mixed, mostly positive, but it does end on a really strong note if you ask me, and I think it looks really nice. Like, damn, show me that Rune City. Damn, this shit looks cool. What are your favorite SMT dungeons? Let me know, or maybe get mad at me for not including the exclusive dungeon from SMT 9's DLC, plus 10, or leaving out something from SMT 4, Soul Hackers, etc. I know someone down there has already gone to ask me to elaborate on why I prefer Tartarus to that one dungeon in Soul Hackers. And if they have it, go, be the first, do it, get the bag. In all seriousness, I would be interested in knowing what you guys like, and let me know if you want to see more of these top whatever videos like this, SMT related or not. I do have another one of these in the work, so stay tuned for that, because even if you like this or not, it's gonna happen. Remember, stay hydrated and have a decent night.